My name's Rowan Blake, 26, and this is the night my dad decided I wasn't his daughter anymore, just a pig. He shouted it with every vein in his neck showing, the kind of rage that makes walls shake. One moment, I was unlocking the door after another draining temp shift, and the next, he was standing there, red-faced, holding my duffel bag. You think you can just live here forever, freeloading like some pig? That word hit harder than I expected. Pig. Not lazy, not ungrateful. Pig. I stood there, frozen, while he kept yelling about bills, about how I'd never made him proud, about how I was embarrassing this family. I tried to tell him I paid my share, that I'd been job hunting every single week, but he wasn't listening. Then, before I could finish my sentence, he hurled my bag across the porch. Clothes spilled onto the concrete. The Arizona air burned my throat, but the heat in his eyes was worse. He pointed at the door. Get out. You're done here. My mother hovered near the kitchen doorway, saying nothing. The silence behind his voice was the kind that cuts deeper than the scream itself. So, I picked up my things. No yelling, no crying, no begging, just quiet. When I walked away, the screen door slammed behind me, and for the first time in years, I didn't look back. Because if he wanted silence, I was about to give him the kind he'd never forget. Let me know where you are hearing this story from. I would love to know how far my story goes. The morning light felt almost artificial, as if it didn't belong to me anymore. The air was cooler inside the small apartment where I'd spent the night, but my thoughts were still burning. I had never seen my life stripped down to a single bag before. Now it sat at the edge of the couch, quiet and accusing, reminding me that I had nowhere else to go. My friend Lila Kim had given me a place to land without asking questions. She just pointed to the couch, handed me a blanket, and left for work. That small act of grace carried more comfort than anything I had felt in months. There was no lecture, no blame, no noise, just space. I stayed still for a while, listening to the low hum of traffic outside. My body felt weightless, but my chest was heavy. I tried to name the feeling shame, maybe, but it wasn't quite that. It was the shock of seeing everything I'd worked for evaporate in a single evening. The life I had tried to build under someone else's roof had collapsed overnight, and somehow I was the only one buried under it. The silence around me wasn't peaceful. It was too wide, too aware. It forced me to think about the years I'd spent keeping that house running. I had fixed the router when it failed, updated the insurance payments online, handled every digital bill that my parents couldn't navigate. It wasn't that they didn't know how it was that they never wanted to learn. I became their invisible infrastructure, the quiet system that kept their world steady while mine stayed stuck. Now, lying on a borrowed couch, I realized how much of myself I had poured into keeping things from falling apart. Every email reminder, every late-night bill payment, every little fix, it was all invisible labor, uncredited and expected. Maybe that was the real reason the word pig stung so deeply. I wasn't a parasite. I was the one feeding everyone else. By midday, I forced myself up and made coffee with the little machine on the counter. The taste was sharp, almost metallic, but it grounded me. I sat at the small table with my laptop and opened my email. No messages from home, not a single text. For a second, I hovered over the contact list, then deleted every family chat thread, not out of anger, but out of exhaustion. I began sorting through my accounts, more out of habit than plan. I checked my credit score, my savings, the automatic drafts I'd set up for utilities back at home. I hadn't realized how deeply entangled everything was until that moment. My name was still on several subscriptions, a few shared accounts, even the family phone plan. It wasn't just about money, it was control. Somewhere along the way, my parents had let me handle every digital aspect of their lives because it was convenient. I didn't mind. It made me feel useful. But usefulness can become a leash. The thought struck me hard. I scrolled through the old bills, noticing familiar patterns, charges I didn't remember making, small withdrawals under names I didn't recognize. Some were recent, some months old. I kept scanning until I found one that made my stomach twist. A gaming purchase, Tyler's favorite platform. The charge had gone through on my secondary card. I felt a slow wave of disbelief, followed by the familiar numbness that comes after years of being taken for granted. Maybe he didn't realize the card was still active. Or maybe he did, and just assumed I'd keep paying like always. I leaned back on the couch and stared at the ceiling. Every line of it felt like a timeline, every crack another year I'd spent trying to keep peace in a place that never wanted it. The day stretched on in long, quiet fragments. I went for a short walk around the block, the desert wind carrying dust and sunlight in equal measure. I thought about how people talk about starting over like it's this bold, cinematic moment, standing tall, walking into freedom. It isn't. It's small. It's sitting on a couch with your laptop open, deciding whether to unlink a phone number or cancel a card. That afternoon, I took a deep breath and started the process. One account at a time. Email recovery, password changes, canceling auto payments, removing my information from shared platforms. Each click felt like a heartbeat, steady, deliberate, irreversible. I didn't do it out of revenge. I did it because I was tired of being a system that everyone used but no one saw. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't fixing something for anyone else. I was just protecting what little was left of me. Evening crept in slowly. Lila came home late, dropped her keys on the counter, and gave me a quiet nod. She didn't ask how I was doing. She didn't need to. She just existed there, calm and human, proof that not every relationship needs to hurt to feel real. After she went to shower, I checked the last notification on my phone, a receipt for an automatic payment I didn't authorize. Another shared expense. My name still tied to their comfort. I stared at the screen until my reflection blurred. Something inside me shifted. This wasn't sadness anymore. It was recognition. I closed the laptop, turned off the lights, and lay back down on the couch. I could still feel the static of his voice echoing in the back of my mind, but the space around me was different now. It wasn't silence filled with fear, it was the beginning of something unclaimed. Tomorrow, I'd make it official. The city looked different when you walked through it with purpose. A few mornings later, I stepped into a small bank branch downtown, the kind with sterile white walls and a faint hum of air conditioning that never quite reached comfort. The glass doors closed behind me with a soft click that sounded more like closure than convenience. I didn't come there out of anger. I came to separate what was mine from what wasn't. The clerk at the counter directed me to a bank officer named Mr. Lawson. His calm, almost mechanical politeness steadied me. He asked what I needed, and I explained that I wanted to remove my name from a shared account I had been managing for years. I told him it was a joint arrangement for bill payments, but that I no longer lived at that address. He nodded without judgment, typing in quiet bursts, his fingers tapping like distant rain. As he reviewed the records, I could see a reflection of my old life on the computer screen, numbers, deposits, transactions, all the invisible threads that had tied me to a place that didn't want me. When he asked for identification, I handed over my ID and a small folder of documents I had prepared. I'd stayed up the night before scanning, labeling, and printing everything I might need. Organization was my defense mechanism. It gave me control in spaces where I usually had none. While Mr. Lawson processed the request, I stared at the security cameras in the corners of the ceiling. They recorded everything but felt like they saw nothing. I wondered if that was what it was like to live in that house for so long, watched, but never seen. After a few moments, he looked up and said that the removal could take up to 5 business days. In the meantime, he offered to temporarily freeze all pending changes on the account to protect both parties. His tone was neutral, his words precise, but something about the word freeze settled into me like a heartbeat. It wasn't revenge, it was preservation. He asked if I wanted to report a few flagged transactions. I hesitated. Then I agreed. The screen showed purchases under my old card, recurring entertainment charges, online orders, and a few payments that had no receipts. Some matched my memories, others didn't. Mr. Lawson explained that once the account was reviewed, both users would need to verify every transaction. It was routine, he said, necessary for accuracy. I nodded, grateful that procedure, for once, was on my side. When I left the bank, the desert heat wrapped around me again. But it didn't sting this time. It felt earned. I walked a few blocks to clear my head. Each step felt lighter, as if some invisible cord had loosened from my spine. The decision I'd made wasn't grand or cinematic. It was quiet and absolute. I didn't need them to suffer. I just needed to stop carrying their chaos in my name. That night, back at Lila's apartment, I opened my laptop again. A new email notification blinked at the top of the screen. Verification request. Account access change. Beneath it, another message appeared. Payment failure notice, Blake Hardware. For a few seconds, I simply watched the subject lines, frozen in disbelief. It had happened faster than I expected. My removal from the account had triggered an automated freeze, pausing every linked payment until both parties confirmed the changes. The same system I'd once used to manage their stability had just become their obstacle. I didn't feel proud. I didn't feel guilty either. I just felt empty. In a clean way, like wiping dust off a shelf that had been cluttered for too long. Lila noticed me staring at the screen but didn't ask. She poured herself tea, the steam rising between us like a quiet boundary. There were no words necessary. She didn't need to understand the mechanics of it. She only needed to witness the moment. Later that evening, I took out my notebook, the one where I wrote reminders and small truths. I wrote, "You can't be their system and their scapegoat at the same time." It wasn't poetry. It was proof. Sleep came slowly. My mind kept replaying small details, the sound of the keyboard, the chill of the air conditioning, the indifferent professionalism of Mr. Lawson's voice. In a world where emotions had no currency, rules were the only refuge, and for the first time, I was grateful for bureaucracy. The next morning, the sunlight cut sharply through the blinds. I checked my email again, a confirmation that my name had been officially removed. The freeze would remain until verification cleared from the primary account holder. I imagined my father seeing the notification for the first time, his certainty cracking when the familiar convenience no longer worked. I wondered if he'd even understand what it meant. Probably not. He'd think it was a glitch, a temporary inconvenience, another thing to shout about. But that was the beauty of it. It wasn't a glitch. It was the quiet echo of every ignored effort, every thankless night, every invisible contribution I had made. The system had finally mirrored what I'd felt for years. Frozen, waiting for acknowledgement that never came. By noon, I logged out of every shared platform and deleted the old bookmarks that led back to that house. The silence afterward wasn't uncomfortable. It was clean, sterile like the inside of that bank, cool and detached. I didn't know what would happen next, and for once, I didn't need to. The only certainty was that something had shifted permanently. I closed the laptop, exhaled slowly, and let the air sit in my lungs until it stopped trembling. Sometimes healing doesn't sound like forgiveness. It sounds like paperwork being processed. By the weekend, my phone pulsed with attention I had not requested. Notifications layered over the lock screen like stickers on a suitcase I never packed. I resisted the urge to tap anything. Refusal felt like a first boundary that cost nothing. Curiosity still pressed its thumb to the glass. I opened the apps and watched a familiar choreography, relatives posting thinned-out morals, acquaintances echoing them with vague captions. No names appeared, yet the outline traced me: someone who takes, someone who leaves, someone whose absence creates work for others. I set the phone face down and breathed through the reflex to argue. Proof lived in folders, order lived in labels. I opened the laptop and built the archive I should have made sooner: bank statements by month. Access logs captured by screenshot. Autopay confirmations renamed with dates that formed a single, linear story. Each file quieted the room. Certainty is not loud. It is organized. Patterns surfaced as the folders filled. Recurring charges tied to cards that should have slept. Subscriptions that once benefited everyone, now pulling against a name that no longer belonged in the household ledger. Logins stamped at hours when I was working somewhere else. None of it shocked me. What surprised me was the steadiness in my hands. When caretaking becomes muscle memory, ending it requires the same precision. I wrote a checklist the way paramedics narrate procedures, calm and exact. Remove my name from every shared service. Revoke permissions that expired with my departure. Back up every document. Consult a professional before sending a single message. The list did not sound like revenge. It sounded like hygiene. I scheduled a meeting with Miss Patel, an attorney in consumer protection and digital compliance. Preparing to speak with her felt less like escalation and more like bringing clean instruments to a wound. I arrived with a thumb drive and a brief summary. She supplied definitions: consent, authority, liability. Her questions were simple. What access did I once have? What access did I remove? What evidence shows the sequence? Facts, aligned in order, became their own defense. Together we drafted a neutral notice documenting the steps I had taken: removal from shared platforms, termination of stored payment methods, retention of personal records. The document did not accuse, it recorded. It existed for the same reason a railing does. Back at the apartment, the public narrative kept evolving without me. Secondhand certainty moved from feed to messages, then into voicemail. A mutual acquaintance urged reconciliation in the name of peace. An unknown number confused inconvenience with harm. A cousin posted about loyalty as if loyalty were a leash. I let it pass like weather. Silence is not surrender. It is refusing admission to a show that ends with someone else's applause. I returned to the work of separation. One by one, I unlinked payment methods from services that once relied on my efficiency. I removed recovery emails from profiles that never needed to list me. I watched autopay schedules fail without my approval and felt a steady, untheatrical relief. A brown envelope arrived the next afternoon, its serif font pretending to be neutral. The letter alleged disruption and interference, words dressed in professional clothing that hoped to sting. I read it twice, first for content, then for temperature. Heat fell away on the second pass. What remained were sentences that misrepresented sequence. Missequencing is easy to correct when you have a clock. I placed the letter beside the binder and extracted what it contradicted. I highlighted dates, annotated attachments, and sent the packet to Miss Patel with a concise description. She replied with a draft response that sounded like a level floor. This action, then this confirmation, then this removal, all within my rights and documented at each step. The letter did not demand apology and did not offer one. It simply put events back in order. Noise continued in fragments, softer but persistent. The group thread lit with observations about duty. I muted it without ceremony. I considered typing a final message and discarded the impulse. Explanations are a currency that devalues each time you spend it on audiences committed to a different story. I kept moving through the checklist. I closed accounts tied to addresses I no longer used. I changed recovery questions written in a younger voice. I unsubscribed from services that assumed permanence. Each action reclaimed a square foot of mental space. My attention stretched into places that had gone numb: hunger, rest, curiosity. Systems responded on their own timeline. A vendor email pinged a past due reminder to a mailbox I no longer managed. A service portal requested reauthorization from the primary account holder. A credit alert recorded a change I expected. The machinery of consequence moved with bureaucratic patience, indifferent to feelings and faithful to sequence. I did not nudge it. In the late hours, I let grief sit beside me without negotiation. I grieved the idea of family I had built in my head, the one where effort softened anger and reliability purchased respect. I grieved the younger self who believed endurance could translate into love. The arithmetic of emotional labor never balances. Mercy is closing the ledger and ending deposits that will never be acknowledged. A week after our meeting, Miss Patel forwarded confirmation that my response had been logged. The tone from the other side shifted from accusation to administration. Demands became requests. Assertions gave way to forms. Procedure cooled what outrage kept warm. I labeled the final folder, printed the last receipt, and placed everything into a box at the back of the closet. The box did not store anger. It stored chronology. If anyone ever asked what happened, I could point to a sequence instead of a speech. By nightfall, I turned off every notification tied to home. The silence that followed did not feel like exile. It felt like a room returned to its original dimensions, ready to be arranged by someone who finally had the keys. The mornings had grown quieter. No messages blinked across my screen, no requests waiting in drafts. Silence had shape, now it curved around the furniture, settled into the rhythm of the clock. I thought I had reached a kind of stillness that could not be interrupted. Then the vibration came. It was a short email, unsigned but familiar in its rhythm. The phrasing was careful, the way guilt often disguises itself as formality. My father did not use greetings or endings. He began with logistics. Something about the house, about bills that needed clearing, about my role in the family systems, as if I were an application that had gone offline. Reading it felt like opening a file corrupted by memory. He wrote that there had been confusion after my departure, that some accounts required my approval to be reinstated, that he hoped I would find time to resolve these complications. Every sentence leaned on civility like a crutch. Beneath it, I could hear the same impatience that had once filled every room of that house, the impatience for me to fix what they had broken. I read it twice, not for meaning but for tone. It wasn't apology, it was accounting. It treated consequence as a malfunction. It asked me to step back into the machine I had unplugged. I stared at the line about family unity, and wondered when unity had become a password instead of a principle. The cursor blinked at the bottom of the message, an invitation to respond. Old reflexes stirred. Draft a polite reply, restore calm, offer structure. But reflex is not duty. I closed the laptop without typing a word. Later that day, I walked to the cafe near my apartment, the one with uneven chairs and sunlight that fractured across the floor. I ordered coffee and sat near the window, watching strangers pass without recognizing me. It felt like relief disguised as anonymity. The world outside my name still existed, indifferent and intact. My thoughts wandered to the phrase my grandmother once used whenever someone sought fairness from the wrong source. "Why ask the pig about the cleanliness of the pen?" she would say. half amused, half resigned. It had taken me years to understand it. Now, it arrived without invitation, perfect in its timing. Why ask the pig? Why expect remorse from those who had never known accountability? The question didn't carry bitterness, it carried distance. It allowed me to see him not as the authority I once feared, but as a man clinging to the illusion of control. He wasn't cruel now, he was predictable. Predictable in his inability to imagine me beyond my utility. Predictable in how he framed every request as responsibility, never as gratitude. I stirred the coffee until it cooled. Across the street, a family argued gently over pastries, their laughter spilling into apology, then back into laughter again. It wasn't perfect, but it was human. I realized I had been raised on a diet of perfection, no room for mistakes, only obedience. And here was imperfection, breathing freely in daylight. When I returned home, the quiet greeted me like an ally. I opened my journal and wrote, "He doesn't want me back, he wants the function I performed." The sentence didn't sting, it clarified. There is power in naming what no longer deserves you. Another email arrived that night, shorter this time. No subject line, just a single sentence. Family doesn't quit. I looked at it for a long moment, then at the reflection of my face in the screen. I had quit, yes, but only the version of family that quit me first. I moved the message to a folder titled, Records. No reply necessary. Days passed without further contact. I learned that indifference, when earned, is not cruelty, it's calibration. My energy adjusted to a life where everything I touched was my choice. Bills I paid carried only my name. Meals I cooked filled only my plate. The quiet routine of self-responsibility became its own kind of wealth. One afternoon, while sorting through old documents, I found a photograph. My father standing beside me at the old porch, his hand hovering just above my shoulder, not touching. I remembered that moment, not the warmth of connection, but the choreography of presentation. A picture for relatives, proof of harmony. The truth had been cropped out long before the shutter clicked. I slipped the photograph into the same box where I stored the legal documents and labeled it, Context. Some records exist not to preserve pain, but to prevent confusion about where it began. I stopped expecting closure from him. Closure is a story told backward to make chaos look intentional. I didn't need that. What I needed was continuation, a life that didn't revolve around repair. In time, I stopped checking the inbox. I stopped anticipating the next small tug from that old orbit. People assume healing feels like forgiveness, but sometimes it feels like irrelevance. His silence now was not absence, it was balance. The equation had finally evened out. When friends asked about family, I said I was renovating the word. Family, to me, would mean people who listen before they name, who don't confuse access with love, who understand that care without control is still care. It sounded simple, but it took half a lifetime to believe it. Weeks later, as I watered the small plant by the window, a thought crossed my mind with the clarity of a clean surface. If he ever wrote again, I would not need to answer. The world would not tilt. The sun would not wait. Some stories resolve not by confrontation, but by ceasing to repeat themselves. I left the inbox unopened that evening. Outside, the city lights flickered like quiet affirmations, each one a reminder that distance can be a kind of peace. I poured another cup of coffee, leaned against the window, and whispered the phrase again softly, almost fondly this time. Why ask the pig? It happened on an afternoon that looked like any other. The air was steady, the kind that forgets to move. I was sorting laundry when a shadow fell across the hallway, glass tall, hesitant, shaped by memory more than presence. For a moment, I thought it was a trick of light. Then the shadow shifted, and I knew it was him. There was no sound at first, only the weight of recognition pressing through the air. I did not walk toward the door. I stood where I was, fingers still resting on a folded shirt, the fabric warm from the dryer. The rhythm of my breath stayed even. It was astonishing how calm the body can remain when the heart no longer seeks permission. The knock came soft, deliberate, polite. It was the sound of someone practicing humility like a foreign language. I could have ignored it. I almost did. But curiosity is not surrender, it's observation. I walked to the door and looked through the peephole. Time had rewritten him in subtler fonts, the slope of the shoulders, the cautious stance, the aging lines that mapped regret without admitting it. He waited. His face carried the expression of a man rehearsing sincerity for an audience that may not arrive. I didn't open the door. Not yet. I wanted to see how long he could stand in the truth without performance. When the silence grew heavier than the air itself, I turned the handle. The door opened halfway, a measured distance enough for sight. not for entry. His mouth moved, but I couldn't hear words. The sound dissolved before it reached meaning. What came instead was an awareness. The same porch where I had once stood holding a duffel bag, the same threshold that had expelled me. Now it was reversed. He was outside. I was inside. I noticed the details that stories rarely keep: the nervous shuffle of his shoes, the faint scent of cologne masking something older, the tremor in his left hand. His eyes didn't hold command anymore. They searched for ground. It wasn't pity I felt, nor triumph. It was distance made visible. He looked smaller, not in size, but in certainty. I waited for anger to arrive, but it didn't. Anger had no use here. It would have been like shouting at weather already gone. What replaced it was clarity. The man at my door was not the storm. He was the leftover cloud, drifting without purpose. He gestured toward the box he held. Paper edges peeked through a plastic bag, corners softened by rain. I recognized handwriting on one of the envelopes, my mother's. The sight pressed at something deep but not tender. I took a breath, opened the door a fraction wider, and accepted the box. My hands brushed the plastic only long enough to confirm it was real. Then I set it down on the floor beside me, between us like a neutral witness. He said something again, too quiet to follow. His lips formed shapes of apology or explanation. I couldn't tell which. I didn't need to. Meaning isn't always in words, it's in the posture of asking. His posture was one of someone seeking entry to a place already closed. I let the silence fill the doorway until it became architecture. Between us stood years of repetition, expectation, and inheritance. All the invisible labor of love unreturned, all the noise of duty mistaken for care. I could have stepped forward, but I didn't. I had learned that closeness without respect is just proximity. He looked at me as if waiting for instruction. For the first time, I didn't have any. I wasn't the one to organize, to fix, to make sense. The responsibility had finally expired. I watched realization settle across his face, the understanding that my quiet was not defiance, but conclusion. The wind shifted. A leaf scraped the porch, and he turned slightly, startled by the smallest sound. I almost smiled at the humanity of it. Once that vulnerability would have broken me open. Now it simply confirmed the balance had changed. I no longer lived in reaction. He stepped back, unsure of what to do with his hands. I saw the impulse to reach out, to touch my arm as he used to when words failed him. But gestures carry memory, and memory carries consequence. I didn't move, and neither did he. The moment held long enough to acknowledge what both of us had lost: the illusion that forgiveness requires reunion. Eventually, he nodded. It wasn't apology, just recognition of the boundary between us. He turned toward the stairs. The sound of his steps was slow, deliberate, each one erasing an old echo from the night he had thrown me out. When the doorframe no longer held his shape, I exhaled for the first time since the knock. I closed the door gently. The latch clicked, a sound that once meant confinement now meant containment. I leaned against it, feeling neither relief nor sorrow, only completion. The visit hadn't reopened wounds, it had confirmed their healing. The box on the floor waited. I opened it with the same calm I reserved for ordinary tasks. Inside were old letters, some unopened, and photographs yellowed at the edges. I sorted them with steady hands. Some went into the drawer labeled Archive, others into the bin. History deserves order, not worship. Among the papers, I found a small note in my mother's handwriting. It said only, "Keep what is useful." I folded it once, placed it in my journal, and closed the cover. Useful, such a simple word, stripped of sentiment, full of wisdom. Outside, footsteps faded down the street. I didn't look through the window to follow them. Watching him leave would have implied longing, and I had none left to spend. My life had resumed its own currency, quiet, deliberate, mine. Later, as dusk thinned the light, I brewed tea and stood at the same window where the knock had first reached me. The street lamp flickered, steadying itself against the dark. The evening looked exactly as it had before, yet everything had changed. I thought of how endings rarely announce themselves. Sometimes they just arrive, carrying nothing dramatic, only stillness. His visit was not an event. It was evidence, the final proof that I no longer needed to explain my piece to anyone. I carried the box to the closet, set it beside the others, and closed the door. No ceremony, no farewell, just order returning to its rightful place. The apartment was quiet again. The air moved freely, unobserved. Somewhere beyond the glass, a train passed, low and distant, a sound without demand. I let it fade, then returned to the table, where the tea had cooled but not lost its purpose. Some stories don't end with forgiveness or revenge. They end when there's nothing left to reclaim. I had reached that place. And so, when the night deepened and the house settled into its own rhythm, I whispered a single line not to him, but to the space he had left behind. You may knock again, but I no longer live at that door. Morning arrived without ceremony. I moved with the steadiness I had practiced, small, deliberate gestures returning what frenzy once stole. Coffee, notebook, a single word on the page, inheritance. The word divided into two kinds. Some inheritances come as envelopes and keys, others arrive as habits and myths. I decided to inventory the second kind. It felt like housekeeping for a life I meant to keep. I listed silence used as punishment, effort equated with worth, love defined as service, certainty mistaken for leadership, unity quoted as leash. Across from each, I wrote a replacement. Silence practiced as peace, effort respected as effort, love recognized as choice, leadership measured by listening, unity rebuilt with consent. The page became a small court where the old rules finally lost jurisdiction. The apartment held an industrious quiet. I sorted papers into 3 piles. Keep, archive, discard. Order is a kindness no one can take back. At the bottom of a folder, a card spelled my name like a task. I dropped it into discard and did not look again. Outside, the city practiced the ordinary. Routine was not the enemy, it was scaffold. I used it: laundry, a short run, a confirmation call, a grocery note. Each task closed a loop and returned attention to the center. I used to measure worth by the loops I closed for others. The arithmetic was unforgiving. Now I measured differently. Boundaries that held, quiet that remained, needs I met without permission. This metric lacked spectacle and also exhaustion. Late afternoon asked for review. I checked finances like weather conditions to note, not threats. Bills were simple, carrying a single name. Mine no longer sounded like an apology on a statement. A building email announced scheduled maintenance. Predictability once pinned me, now it served me, arriving as reminders and calendars, the small machinery of a life with fewer secrets. Inheritance did not resist. I could take what I needed and refuse the rest. Refusal was not a slammed door. It was a door never mine, left closed without apology. Evening edged in. I tested the air on the narrow balcony. The street exhaled a clean fatigue. Somewhere a dog barked once, pinning the map of now. I liked the sound because it asked for nothing. Memories visited without ambush. They behaved like guests who knew the rules. Shoes off, voice low. I allowed one the dim hallway, a bag at my feet. I watched it as if it belonged to someone I loved. Compassion works better at a distance. I returned the scene to the archive in my mind labeled, survived. Near the boxes, a small plant had once leaned toward a window it could not reach. I moved it closer. It recovered gradually, thickening into a design that made sense. Survival is not the goal. Growth is. Survival is the hallway. Growth is the room with a light switch and a chair with your name on it. I made tea. In the notebook I wrote another word. Consequence. Not the kind wielded like threat, but the honest sort that follows action. Systems send notices. Accounts. Update. People meet the geometry of their choices. Gravity requires no press release. I set the box labeled context on the table without opening it. I wanted proof that I could sit with presence without explanation. The box watched me like a mirror available, not demanding. After a minute, I returned it to the shelf. Completion can be quiet. The room accepted the lamp's rule. Acceptance is underrated, not surrender, but naming reality and proceeding with dignity. When younger, I mistook defiance for strength. Strength often looks like the maintenance of ordinary happiness. Before bed, I made a list. Keep learning, keep saving, keep the door closed to what does not enter with respect. Then one more line, keep room for joy that arrives without proof. I had trained myself to distrust unverified goodness. I would practice believing it. I set the phone face down. The apartment settled like a habitat. It is astonishing how a body rests when the mind is not negotiating with the past. This is the end of the story only because it is the beginning of living the kind where the calendar holds more gratitude than dread, where a knock is just a delivery, where inheritance becomes editable, and the edits are merciful. I memorized the room in darkness. It belonged to me, and I belonged to no one who would rather own my function than know my name. Sleep arrived by the path I left clear. What remains for anyone listening is not a secret or a plan, but a small truth learned by failing at louder versions of it. Peace cannot be built with tools borrowed from control. Respect cannot be bought with hours disguised as love. Broken stories do not mend by waiting at the fracture for the same author to change their pen. If you need a lesson, take this. Measure life by what you choose, not by what chooses you. Count the boundaries that held, the mornings that opened gently, the nights that ended without fear. Keep what is useful, archive what is past, discard what asks you to shrink. And when someone returns to test the hinges, remember doors are not invitations just because they exist. Some stay closed, some never were yours. Choose the rooms that hold your name without asking you to disappear. One more thing I keep for myself and offer to anyone who needs it. Progress is not a staircase, it is a tide. Some days it brings you farther than you imagined. Some days it retreats and reveals what still needs cleaning. Do not mistake the retreat for failure. That exposed ground is instruction. Sweep it. Rinse what can be rinsed. Leave what belongs to the sea. Then step back and let the water return. Your life will learn your shoreline. And when it does, you will stop arguing with the waves and start arranging your home with windows facing the light.